My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 33 years old. I grew up in a quiet suburb, just outside Denver, raised by two parents who always told me we were struggling, that I had to work harder than everyone else because we had less. I believed them. I never asked for much. I wore hand-me-downs until college and worked two part-time jobs, just to afford textbooks. My grandma, my father's mother, lived in another state and wasn't around much. She'd send birthday cards, Christmas checks, and short, loving letters, but I never thought much about her financial role in my life until that night. It happened at what was supposed to be a typical Sunday family dinner. My parents invited my grandma to visit for a week, and she insisted on making a big family meal before flying back home. The table was set with roast chicken, potatoes, and the kind of wine my dad only opened when he wanted to impress someone. My cousins were there, my aunt too. I sat next to my grandma. She held my hand halfway through the meal, looked at me with those soft, concerned eyes and asked, "Daniel, is the $2,000 I send you every month still helping with rent and groceries?" The room fell into a dead silence. Forks froze mid-air. My dad coughed into his napkin. My mom didn't even blink. I just stared at Grandma, stunned. "The what?" I said, my voice almost a whisper. Her smile wavered. "The money I send to your parents every month for you," she repeated gently. "Hasn't it been reaching you, dear?" That was the exact moment I saw my parents' faces drain of all color. It was like watching a curtain get pulled off a secret no one was ready to explain. I glanced at my father, waiting for him to say something, anything, but he looked away. My mother forced a smile and said, "Mum, I don't think this is the time to talk about," but Grandma held up her hand. I'd never seen her look so serious. "It's been 5 years," she said, her voice calm but piercing. "That money was meant for Daniel, every month. I wired it to your account with that exact purpose, and now I need to know where it went." You could feel the temperature shift. The air got heavy. My aunt looked down. My cousin reached for a napkin she didn't need, and I sat there, doing the math in my head. 5 years, $2,000 a month. That's over $100,000, and not a dime had ever touched my hands. My mind started to burn, not with rage, but with the precision of betrayal, and I knew something else in that moment. This wasn't the time to explode, it was the time to observe. The truth had just walked into the room, and I wasn't about to let it leave unnoticed. I didn't say much for the rest of dinner, but that night, after everyone left and the table was cleared, I started a quiet investigation, not with vengeance in my heart, but with a quiet determination. My parents had rewritten the truth of my entire adult life, but they had no idea who I had become in silence. And now, I was going to make sure they understood exactly what that silence was capable of. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing her voice. "Hasn't it been reaching you, dear?" I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together every struggle I endured that could have been eased, even slightly, by that money, the missed meals, the cold winters without proper heat, the hours I clocked at a gas station between college classes while my friends got internships, all while someone, the people who raised me, had been siphoning what was meant to help me live, just to fuel their own lives. I started thinking back on things that didn't make sense. How my mom always insisted I apply for student aid even though she once said Grandma was helping out. How they refused to co-sign a small car loan, even when my commute was falling apart. I remembered a time when I asked if Grandma could help with rent one desperate month, and my dad snapped that she already does enough. I thought it was financial stress speaking. Now I knew it was guilt or greed. The more I thought about it, the more disturbing it became. They didn't just hide money, they built a narrative of scarcity. They taught me to live beneath myself, to work twice as hard for half the reward. Not because we were struggling, but because they decided I wasn't entitled to the truth. And I had to wonder, why? Was it control, jealousy, or had I just become another source of leverage in their world of image and manipulation? I spent the next day replaying the dinner conversation over and over again. I didn't text Grandma. I didn't confront my parents. I needed time. I needed clarity. Not revenge, but understanding. If they were willing to steal from me in silence, what else had they hidden? I decided to get answers. Slowly, carefully. I knew better than to show my hand. People who deceive that well don't just confess. They adapt. They deny. I called my bank and requested every financial transaction I could find from my college years. I checked every deposit I ever received. No trace of those monthly payments. I combed through emails from my parents, old messages, letters from Grandma. Nothing suspicious. They had covered their tracks well, which made it worse. This wasn't accidental. This was coordinated. But I wasn't helpless. I just needed one piece of evidence to crack it open. By the end of that week, I started something I hadn't done in years. I began journaling. Every memory, every subtle manipulation, every quiet red flag I had ignored for the sake of family harmony. Because I knew where this was going and I wasn't going to explode. I was going to expose. I didn't ask Grandma anything directly. Not yet, but I did call her. I thanked her again for coming to dinner, told her how much it meant to me, and asked casually if she still had the receipts from those transfers she mentioned. Of course, she said, without hesitation. I keep everything. Would you like me to send them to you? I told her yes, as gently as I could. Just for clarity, Grandma, there's a bit of confusion I want to straighten out. I could tell she sensed something was off, but she didn't press. 3 days later, I received a small padded envelope with copies of wire transfers. Every month. Like clockwork. For 5 years. It was all there. The dates, the amounts, the destination account numbers. And they all matched my parents' account. Not mine. It hit me harder than I thought it would. Seeing it on paper was different than just hearing it. It was indisputable. They took every dollar, lied every month, and still looked me in the eyes and told me we couldn't afford better. I kept everything, scanned it, filed it, and started building a plan. I didn't want their money. I didn't want to humiliate them. I wanted accountability, quiet, deliberate accountability. So I called a friend of mine, a lawyer I met in graduate school. I told him the story, showed him the documents, and asked a single question. If someone misappropriated funds that were intended for another adult, what could be done? He didn't sugarcoat it. You have a case, Daniel. It's financial misrepresentation, especially if your grandmother explicitly designated that money for you. But legal action wasn't my goal. Not yet. I didn't want to drag this into court or destroy the family. I wanted the truth to be undeniable, not just for me, but for everyone who watched them play the role of the perfect parents. I wanted them to face what they'd done in a way that couldn't be dismissed, minimized, or spun, and I knew exactly where that would happen, at the next family gathering. It was a cousin's birthday the following month. A backyard barbecue, casual but well-attended. I offered to give a toast which no one thought was odd. I'd done it before. I stood there, drink in hand, and thanked everyone for coming together. Then, as naturally as I could, I pivoted. You know, I said, glancing at my parents. Sometimes we forget how lucky we are when family steps in during hard times, like when someone quietly sends support month after month to help out their grandson. The silence returned, familiar and thick. I saw my mom freeze. My dad stared down at his plate. I just want to say how grateful I am, I continued, locking eyes with my grandmother, for everything you've done, and how sorry I am that the support you meant for me never made it to me. Not once. Gasps. Fidgeting, one of my aunts muttered something under her breath. My grandmother leaned back, her face blank but her jaw tight. My parents were paralyzed, and that was just the beginning. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply laid the truth down on the table like a folded napkin. Clean, quiet, undeniable. 5 years. 60 months. Over $100,000. Not a dime ever reached me, I said, my voice even. I pulled the documents from my inside pocket. I brought copies, just in case there was any confusion. My aunt took one and looked at it like it was a ghost. My cousin, who once borrowed money from me to avoid asking our parents, looked stunned. The air had gone sharp. My mother stood slowly, as if her legs had forgotten how to support her. "Daniel," she began, but the authority in her voice was gone. It wasn't the voice that used to scold me for asking for help. It was a voice trying to crawl out of guilt. We had reasons. You were young. We needed to manage things. We always intended, but my grandma raised her hand again, the same way she had done at the first dinner, and everything went silent. "I trusted you," she said. Her voice didn't rise, but the room bent around it. "I trusted you with my son's well-being. I thought you were passing the blessings forward, not pocketing them. I sent that money for Daniel, not for new kitchen appliances or trips to Aspen." It wasn't dramatic, it was devastating. My father looked like someone had pulled the ground from beneath him. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt gravity, like something sacred was breaking in real time, and everyone was watching. I left the papers on the table. I didn't demand an apology. I didn't need to. The truth had done what I couldn't have with years of confrontation. It exposed the rot, and now they had to sit with it. That night, I received a dozen texts from cousins and extended family. Some were shocked. Some admitted they had always sensed something was off. One message stuck with me. "You did it the right way. You didn't destroy them. You just turned on the light." My parents tried to call that night. I let it ring. Then again, and again. Finally I answered, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. My mother's voice was trembling. She asked if we could talk privately, as if the issue had been too public. I told her calmly, "There's nothing private about stolen trust. You weren't just taking money, you were shaping my reality and expecting me never to question it." She cried. My father got on the line, said it was a misunderstanding. I said nothing. I let silence carry the weight they'd tried to bury. I didn't hang up. I let them sit in that silence. Let them hear what it sounds like when their child finally stops pleading, stops performing, and starts protecting his own peace. The call ended without a goodbye. Just the soft click of something long overdue. In the weeks that followed, the family dynamic shifted like plates beneath an earthquake. My parents stopped attending gatherings. Invitations were sent, but they never responded, and when they did, it was through vague texts, filled with half-truths and careful omission. They weren't ready to own what they'd done. Not publicly, and maybe not even privately, but the damage was already done. And this time, it wasn't mine to carry. My grandmother and I grew closer. We talked every weekend, sometimes about life, sometimes about nothing. But I could tell she was trying to make up for the years we'd both been robbed of. "You know," she said once, "I always had a feeling something wasn't right, but I didn't want to believe my own children were capable of that." She didn't need to say more. Betrayal from strangers hurts, but betrayal from those who raised you leaves a silence that never quite goes away. It's a silence I was learning to live with, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. I redirected the funds. Grandma now sent the money to a trust in my name. Something she insisted on even when I told her I was okay. "It's not about the money anymore," she said. "It's about restoring what was taken." And for the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar. Financial breathing room. I wasn't scrambling every month. I wasn't chasing stability like a dog chasing a car. I was calm, focused, and that space gave me a new kind of power, the power to choose. I used some of the money to launch a project I'd shelved for years, a community mentorship initiative for kids from low-income families. I called it the second thread, symbolizing the second chance. So many of us deserve when the first thread of our lives is cut by someone else's decision. The first few months were small, a few teens, a borrowed office, but it grew fast. Word spread, so did support. And ironically, some of that support came from family members who now saw me in a new light. I didn't make announcements. I didn't share inspiring stories online. I just worked quietly. Consistently, I poured every ounce of disappointment into the soil of something better. Every time I remembered a missed opportunity, a job I couldn't take because I couldn't afford gas, a night I went hungry because pride wouldn't let me ask, I planted it into this new ground. And from it, something real began to grow, something no one could steal. Eventually, my parents asked to meet. Not through a phone call, a letter. My mother's handwriting, shaky but deliberate. They wanted to apologize, in person. "We owe you that," she wrote. And maybe they did, but whether I would give them that opportunity, I hadn't decided yet. I read the letter 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because I wanted to feel something. Anger, maybe, forgiveness, closure. But what I felt instead was distance, not just the physical kind, but the emotional divide that forms when trust dies slowly over time. And you're the only one who noticed the funeral. Still, I agreed to meet, not for their sake, but for mine. Not to mend what was broken, but to lay it to rest. We met at a small cafe near where I used to go to school. It was a neutral place, removed from family homes and childhood shadows. They arrived together, looking older than I remembered, smaller somehow. My father reached to hug me, and I stepped back, not to punish him, but because I needed boundaries that didn't exist before. My mother smiled nervously, her eyes filled with some blend of shame and hope. I gestured for them to sit. I didn't say much at first. I wanted them to fill the silence for once. My mother spoke first. "We never meant to hurt you," she said, tears rising too quickly. "It just started. And then it kept going, and it felt easier to lie than to face what we were doing." My father nodded. "We thought we were helping the family as a whole, managing things. We didn't see it as stealing. But we know better now." It was the first time either of them used the word stealing. Not miscommunication, not confusion. And oddly, hearing it out loud didn't ignite me, it released something instead. I told them I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't the same person they raised. "You taught me to work twice as hard, to accept less, to stay small," I said. "And when I succeeded anyway, it wasn't because of you. It was in spite of you. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just told the truth." That's what healing had taught me, the power of truth spoken without vengeance. I stood up before they could respond, placed a sealed envelope on the table. Inside were copies of the mentorship program reports, the photos of the students, the budget funded by what was once siphoned from me. "You didn't believe in me," I said quietly, "but others will benefit because I do." I walked away. Not from family, from the weight, from the need for approval, from the silence that used to swallow my worth. I walked into a life that wasn't stolen, or borrowed, or built on guilt. It was mine. Finally mine. That night, I went home and stood at my window for a long time. The world outside didn't look different, but I did. I was no longer the son waiting to be seen. I was the man who had taken back his narrative, with patience, with precision, and with peace. And peace, I've learned, is the quietest kind of power. The kind that doesn't ask for attention. It just stays. In the days that followed, I felt something unusual, a quiet space inside me where pain used to live. It wasn't joy, not quite, but it was peace. And that peace gave me room to think clearly, even about my parents. I didn't hate them. I didn't even want revenge anymore. What I wanted was distance, a healthy, intentional distance, where I could heal without constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next betrayal disguised as love. People say forgiveness is about letting others off the hook. But what I've learned is that forgiveness, real forgiveness, is the decision to stop bleeding for someone else's knife. I had already stopped bleeding. The wounds had scarred over into something harder, wiser, and strangely compassionate. I didn't need them to pay me back. I didn't need them to crawl for redemption. I just needed them to accept that their chapter in my life was no longer central. I was the author now, and the pen was mine. My grandmother continued supporting the mentorship program. She came to one of our open houses and cried when she met the kids. "I see a little bit of you in each of them," she whispered. "Except now, they won't have to walk alone." That meant more than any apology ever could. She didn't just believe in me. She invested in what I believed in, and that changed the story. Not the past, but the legacy. One of the boys in the program asked me, "Why did you start this?" I thought about telling him everything. About the betrayal, the silence, the cold dinners and missing deposits. But instead, I just said, because I know what it feels like to need help and not know who to ask. He nodded. "Yeah," he said. "It's like people don't see you." I smiled. "They will. Eventually they will." It's strange how life circles back. How the very thing that tried to break you becomes the soil where you plant something lasting. I never imagined I'd thank the pain. But here I was, stronger not in spite of it, but because of it. And while I didn't wish what happened on anyone, I also didn't regret surviving it. Some things can only be learned in the dark. Some truths only arrive when everything else falls away. My parents still send messages now and then. Holidays, birthdays. I respond with grace, but not access. I've learned that not everyone who raised you knows how to respect you. And that's okay, because once you raise yourself, once you reclaim your life from the hands that fumbled it, you don't need their approval, you have your own. And that's enough. I started walking every morning. Just a quiet habit to remind myself I was still here, present, breathing, rebuilding. Sometimes I'd pass places that used to trigger old memories. The corner store where I scraped together coins for groceries during college. The old bus stop where I'd wait at 5 a.m. in freezing wind because I couldn't afford gas. And yet now, when I passed them, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt reverence for the version of me that survived what I didn't yet understand. I didn't realize how much power I'd handed over to people just because they were family, because they were older, because they wore the label of parent like a shield. But once you strip away the titles and the roles, what's left is behavior, and behavior is truth. The truth is, they made choices, and I made mine. I chose not to mirror them. I chose not to get even. I chose to build, quietly, completely. The program kept growing. We partnered with schools, recruited mentors, and helped students get scholarships, internships, even jobs. One girl, Alina, pulled me aside once and said, "This program saved my life. I was going to drop out. Now I want to study psychology." I smiled. but inside I felt something larger, a sense that my story had been redeemed, not by words, but by action. Every ounce of stolen support had been repurposed into something sacred. My grandmother eventually revised her will. I never asked her to. She told me it was her way of honoring what I had done, not as a reward, but as a restoration. She didn't just want her money to go to blood, she wanted it to go to character. That was her word, character. That was the quiet message she sent to the whole family, without shouting, without shame. Just clarity. And clarity, like truth, doesn't need to raise its voice. I kept my relationship with her close and sacred. We had coffee every Sunday. Sometimes we sat in silence. Sometimes we laughed. Sometimes she'd reach over, take my hand, and say, "You've made me proud in ways I never expected," and I'd squeeze her hand back, because sometimes the smallest gestures hold the deepest weight. I didn't need dramatic redemption arcs. I just needed honesty, consistency, and peace. And peace, real peace, had arrived. Not because my parents apologized, not because they changed, but because I did. I chose boundaries. I chose growth. I chose to be the version of myself they never expected to emerge from the shadows. And I never looked back. A year after that family dinner, I was invited to speak at a local leadership conference. The theme was resilience. I hesitated at first, not because I didn't have a story to share, but because I wasn't sure if I was ready to tell it aloud. Not the details, but the heart of it. The slow betrayal, the quiet rebuilding. The victory that didn't come with applause but with peace. Still, I stood at that podium, looked out at a room full of strangers, and told them what I had learned. I didn't name my parents. I didn't even mention family. I talked about what it means to grow up believing you don't deserve more, only to find out you were being held back by the very people who claimed to love you. I told them that healing doesn't always come with a climax. Sometimes it comes with silence. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is not a confrontation, but an unshakable calm. The audience was silent, and then slowly they began to clap. Not loud, not explosive, just steady, respectful. After the talk, a man approached me, maybe in his late 50s, with grey in his beard and weight in his eyes. "You just told my story," he said, "but I'm still stuck in the bitterness. How did you let it go?" I looked at him and said the only honest thing I could. I didn't let go of what happened. I let go of needing them to fix it. Once I stopped waiting for that, I was free. He nodded, eyes shining. I needed to hear that. So had I. Once. Life went on. Quieter, better. The holidays came, and I chose not to attend the big family gathering. Not out of spite, but out of protection. My parents sent a card. No grand gestures, just a signature. No message. That was fine. I'd long since stopped expecting healing from the people who caused the wound. I had learned to create healing on my own terms, in my own space, with people who knew how to honor it. Grandma, though, came over for dinner. We made soup together and listened to jazz. She asked me if I ever regretted how it unfolded. "Not anymore," I said. The truth came out, and I didn't have to destroy anyone to reveal it. She smiled, her eyes soft. "You remind me of your grandfather. He never needed to shout to be heard. He just lived with integrity, and it echoed." That night, I stood alone by the window again. Same street, same stars, but I was not the same man. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something better than relief. I felt whole. Wholeness isn't something that arrives like a prize. It creeps in quietly after you've stopped asking for closure from people who can't give it. It lives in the moments where you choose yourself. Not out of ego, but out of awareness. I had spent years trying to earn what I already deserved: truth, respect, and care. But now I understood something deeper, that the most dignified revenge is a life built beautifully in silence, beyond their reach. A few months later, I got a letter from my father, handwritten. 6 pages. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't try to explain. He simply told the truth. That he had failed me. That he had let fear shape his choices and pride shape his silence. That when I was young and trusting, they took advantage of my trust, and somewhere along the way, they stopped seeing me as a son and started seeing me as a burden. And you turned out better than both of us. He wrote, because you did it without bitterness. I hope someday I can say the same. I didn't write back, not out of cruelty, but because not every apology requires a reply. Sometimes, the act of letting someone live with their own weight is more powerful than lifting it for them. I had carried enough for both of us. It wasn't my job anymore. I let his words rest in a drawer, folded like the pain I'd already outgrown. The mentorship program eventually expanded statewide. We created scholarships, held community summits. Alumni started coming back to teach. I wasn't just healing, I was watching healing multiply. Every student who found hope through that work was a silent echo of everything I'd been denied. And in that echo, I found restoration. Not justice by courtroom, but by consequence. Not vindication by rage, but by creation. Sometimes people ask me if I wish my childhood had been different. I tell them, in a perfect world, yes. But I don't live in a perfect world. I live in this one, the one where I took what was stolen and turned it into something sacred, where I learned how to rise without dragging anyone down, where I walk with dignity because I no longer need anyone else to define it. I still speak softly. I still walk slowly. But make no mistake, I am not the same. I have become everything they tried to prevent, and I've done it without revenge, without spectacle, and without hate. Just quiet truth. Just calm strength. Just peace. The kind that stays. Lekshen.